Hi everyone, Rich and I are back with a look at PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, and this time there's a bit of news to front this comparison, where usually we just pit one side against the other. On the Reset Era forums, I noticed a post which pointed out that you can see the PC graphics settings on console. So what that means is if you plug a keyboard into the console and press the O button, you can see the graphics settings exactly as they appear on PC, except obviously you can't really adjust them and the sliders don't actually have any effect. Nevertheless, you can still see the settings that are being used, or at least in theory what's being used.
Yeah, what's interesting here is that it's not just the settings that you can access, there is kind of full keyboard support that they've left in on the early access code. So yeah, you can use the W, A, S and D keys to move about, and yeah, various other keys do other things. But there's no mouse support for those who are wondering. But it does open up an interesting topic here. Now, the base Xbox One version, the options screen says it runs at 1080p, which it does, but the overall settings preset is set to the very low level, which is not really what we would want from the game. And similarly, if you access the options screen on Xbox One X, it says it's running at the medium setting. So we set about discovering whether this was true or not. So we're looking at the very low setting here on the PC versus the Xbox One. This opening shot here kind of centers more on draw distance. So what's the deal here?
Well, it's fair to say it's not accurate to call Xbox One, the standard Xbox One, equivalent to the PC's very low settings. There's a couple of things which are better and some things which are worse. So for example, it uses higher quality textures and anti-aliasing on the Xbox One compared to very low, but those LODs on that opening shot I just saw, it is actually worse than the very low setting.
Okay, that's not really what you want to hear from your console port, when typically your multi-platform development projects generally veer around the medium to high and sometimes ultra settings. I would say it's not all bad news though, because you can see here that the Xbox One version clearly has better levels of shading involved, and I suspect that's a pass of ambient occlusion that is present on the console version but not on the very low preset. And on top of that, texture detail, as bad as it is on Xbox One, is nowhere near as bad as it is on the PC's very low preset.
To think that it could go one worse than what we're seeing on Xbox One, and it's a bit of a relief, but at the same time we should really be asking for better from Xbox One.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, in terms of multi-platform development, this isn't exactly the console's finest hour, but again, we should stress the game is still early access and in preview, and this is the first stab they've had at getting the game onto console.
One last point actually, when we see the settings menu, a bokeh depth of field effect is used in the background. That's actually absent on the Xbox One version, suggesting post-process effects are lower than very low, which actually has that in effect. But yes, that's about the gist of it. It's a bit of a mixed bag, some settings higher than very low, some settings lower somehow. So let's move on to the other part of the equation here. We've got two 4K feeds. We've got PC running at medium at 3840 by 2160, and the same resolution on Xbox One X, of course, where the settings menu implies that it's running at medium. But again, it's really not the case, and that doesn't really tell the whole story, because Xbox One X, much like the standard Xbox One, is using higher resolution textures than the suggested preset. So yes, we're getting sharper textures across the floor here, and there is definitely a variation in anti-aliasing between the two, so they're definitely not on par in that sense. There's a bit of flickering on the Xbox One X side where it's just not happening on the medium PC setting. And what else can I say? Draw distances, yeah, much like the standard Xbox One comparison to very low, Xbox One X's draw distances aren't as good as the medium setting on PC.
Yeah, but I looked at this and they are better than the very low, so I'd suspect chances are it is the low setting we've got there.
Yeah, that's right. The main standout thing is, I guess, that the textures on Xbox One X are still very soup-like, even though they're better than medium, and so getting ahead of the game here, they're not as good as what you can get at PC's ultra setting. You know, those pin-sharp textures.
So the options screen here gave us a kind of steer on what we could possibly expect, but obviously there has been some customization work done there on both versions, but I think by and large the X version is probably closer to the medium preset than the base Xbox One version is to the very low. But yeah, we'll take a look at how the Xbox One X version compares to the full-fat PC experience a bit later on. But for now, we're going to move on to Xbox One X versus base Xbox One. Dave and I did these captures yesterday using the multiplayer mode. So to explain how we did this, we both entered the game as a squad, one of us was killed and then the other one spectates. And yeah, this allows us to get a really good steer on the graphical comparisons between the two consoles. But one thing I will point out is that whichever system is spectating runs at a lower frame rate than actual gameplay. So when you see that little spectating sign there, expect a jerkier look to the experience there, but it isn't reflected in actual gameplay. But we're just not going to be able to get any kind of comparisons as dynamic as this, so we had to take the hit there.
Yeah, it's worth that hit for sure. And obviously the first thing that stands out is the texture work, the huge disparity in the quality of assets across the board. And looking at Xbox One, I don't think it's really... this just isn't a good looking game as a result of the level of quality they're using here.
From my perspective, they've got 5 gigs of available memory to use on the base system, 9 gigs on the X. So why we're getting these kind of lower quality assets, bit of a mystery to me. And something to bear in mind here is that PC can go higher. It does have ultra level textures, as we'll see in a minute, which the Xbox One X doesn't have.
One big advantage of doing this synchronized play is you get the same time of day, which means, unlike the PC comparisons which we've got coming up, we can actually see things like the shadow quality differences in a more precise manner. So what that means is we can actually deduce that the ambient occlusion setting on Xbox One X is better than the standard Xbox One, and shadow quality, as minor as it is also slightly higher resolution as well.
And of course, going back to those comparisons we did earlier, it stands to reason that the draw distance is better on the Xbox One X, and the foliage draw distance is significantly improved.
Yeah, that's right. But if you look to the far distance, you really do get a sense of the difference in anti-aliasing as well. You know, one is running at 4K, the other at 1080p, but there's so much more shimmer, and these edges just aren't being treated properly on the Xbox One side.
Okay, so let's take a look at effects work here. We've got a burning car here to look at. Let's disregard the disparity in textures for the moment and concentrate on those flames. Essentially the same, really.
Yeah, I think so. Effects wise, you're looking at very similar alpha, but when we come to post effects, that's where we really see a difference. These are subtle things, you know, ambient occlusion actually falls into this bracket. If we're looking at things like lighting and lens flare, you get a lens flare effect on Xbox One X. Also some light shafts as well, as the player kind of occludes the sun. You get kind of what's called a crepuscular ray. On top of that, of course, there's the depth of field effect, which we mentioned earlier. That is instated on Xbox One X as well. So all these are come under the banner of post-processing, and clearly we're getting a much higher setting on X.
So, okay, so we've taken a quick trip to the shore here, and we're taking a look at water reflection effects here. So what's the deal?
Basically, you do see a lot more reflection detail resolved overall. There isn't actually a PC setting specifically for this, but whatever bracket it falls under, X is actually getting the benefits of it.
So that is the console comparison, and I would say that's a vast range of differences that we've got there. Quite subtle, perhaps, but there's some pretty big improvements there regardless, in addition to 4 times the resolution. So let's move on now. Xbox One X 4K versus PC absolutely maxed. So what's the deal?
Right, we didn't get the benefit of having synchronized play. Sadly, there's no cross-play between these two platforms. So Dave helped out here by going through several spots and doing kind of walk forwards and pans, and you get the idea still. The gist is you do get still higher resolution textures on PC, essentially what I'd really hope to see on the X console. Sadly, time of day isn't a perfect match as a result of using 2 different platforms, but there is a very good chance that shadows are also better quality, and of course post effects are ramped up to ultra. All settings are ultra here.
I think we can safely assume that the draw distance on PC Ultra is going to be significantly better than what is the equivalent of the low setting.
That's right, so you'll get more trees, more geometry in the distance, and of course the grass as you walk forward fades in. There's a cascade on both machines. It's more obvious on X. But besides that, you know, it's actually not too bad a showing on Xbox One X. It's just the textures that really irk. Even though they're better than the standard Xbox One, it still sticks out.
I mean, from my perspective, running PUBG on PC, ultra settings, 4K, we couldn't lock to 60 frames per second using a Titan, so yeah, I mean, you're going to need a lot of GPU power to get those little extras there.
It says a lot, doesn't it, that the optimization work, even on the best hardware you can put into a PC, isn't good enough. That they got this game running as it is on Xbox One X is quite telling that the frame rates really aren't where we wanted them to be, as we showed in our performance analysis. Hopefully things can be resolved. This is an early access, of course. We've seen many early access games before, for Ark and Daisy with varying degrees of improvement as the builds got more developed and advanced.
So we're really hoping to get a big improvement here by the time it is actually final. And yes, we do have to stress again that this is our first look at early access code. But at the same time, they're charging £25 for it, and I don't think at the moment you're getting the value there. Although I will say, I mean, we had a great time playing this game yesterday.
Despite all the running around and waiting for action to happen, there was a good sense of anticipation as you're working your way through houses and figuring out what to do next and where to go next. So I can see the appeal definitely, but on a technical level, this has a bit of work to go.
Number one priority is performance. That really is so wildly variable at the moment. Again, I just don't understand why we can't lock to 30 frames per second here. Secondly, the controls, input lag. We're going to get some measurements on that, but I'm not happy with it at the moment. Whether it's down to poorly configured dead zones on the analog sticks or just bad input lag, I'm just not having a great time with the controls on this, so hopefully they can resolve that as well. Those are my two big priorities there. Obviously the textures after that. So yeah, plenty of work to do on this one.
Right, shall we call it there?
Yeah, I think that's basically everything we've got to report on this one for now. So yeah, please do like and subscribe if you enjoyed this in-depth look at how PUBG compares between PC and the two consoles. And of course, this is a 4K videos, so our Digital Foundry Patreon supporters can head over to digitalfoundry.net and grab the full fat source encode for this file. But that's all from us for now. Thanks for watching.